On Christmas Eve, the Martins' house was illuminated with bright lights and decorated with festive ornaments. The smell of pine mixed with the traditional holiday dishes filled the air, and the family gathered to celebrate another Christmas night. But amidst the laughter and toasts, something was happening in silence, something that no one could predict and that would change everything in an instant. The Martins' house was equipped with security cameras in every room, a simple measure to protect the property during the holidays. However, that night, one of these cameras would capture something more than just suspicious movements. It would record something that would leave everyone in shock. Amanda, the oldest daughter in the family, was sitting in the living room, talking with her friends about presents and the joy of Christmas. Her parents were in the kitchen, preparing the feast. Everything seemed to be going well, as always. But when the clock approached midnight, something strange was detected. The camera in the living room began recording movement, but it wasn't anything that could be explained right away. Distracted with her guests, Amanda didn't notice the movement on the screen until the security alarm went off, interrupting the lively conversation. The alert sound echoed through the house, and she rushed to the monitor to see what was going on. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but when she looked more closely, something made her stop suddenly. On the camera screen, a vague figure appeared at the entrance to the living room. It seemed like a shadow, an undefined shape, almost translucent. The most disturbing thing was that the figure seemed to be moving, but there was no sound at all. Amanda looked around the room, but no one else seemed to notice. Her friends were busy, talking and laughing. She leaned in closer to the screen, her eyes fixed on the strange figure. The shadow was slowly approaching the sofa where her friends were sitting. Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. The feeling of discomfort was growing. She looked again at the monitor, trying to understand what she was seeing. The figure seemed like a person, but something was completely wrong. There was no shadow projected on the wall, nothing suggesting that the room's light was touching that shape. The feeling that something was completely out of place was unmistakable. Amanda tried to shake off the thought, telling herself it was just a glitch, but the fear in her chest wouldn't let go. She had to know what was happening. The figure was now closer, and it almost seemed to flicker like a bad signal, as if the camera was struggling to capture it. And yet, no one in the room seemed to notice the odd presence creeping closer. Her friends continued chatting, unaware of the strange apparition appearing on the screen. She couldn't take her eyes off the monitor, her breath quickening as the shadow continued to move closer, now almost at arm's reach of her friends. Just as she was about to call their attention to it, a sudden movement on the screen caught her eye. The shadow turned toward the camera, and for the first time, it seemed to acknowledge her presence. Amanda's heart skipped a beat. What was going on? Was she imagining this? Was it a trick of the lighting or a malfunction? But the figure was too clear, too detailed, and it seemed to have a shape that wasn't quite human, not quite solid. She felt her pulse race as the shadow slowly moved across the room, its form shifting as if it was trying to manifest itself more clearly. Suddenly, the alarm on the security system blared again, louder this time, as if responding to the figure's presence. Amanda jumped in shock, her mind racing. This wasn't just a glitch. This wasn't something explainable. She rushed to the kitchen to grab her parents, her hands shaking as she spoke. "Mom, Dad, something's wrong. Something's happening in the living room." In the security footage, her parents, initially skeptical, followed her to the living room with skepticism. But when they saw the figure on the camera, their expressions changed. The shadow was still there, moving slowly, but this time it was no longer just a vague outline. It seemed to be becoming clearer, almost tangible. And as they watched, it started to move, stepping closer to the couch where her friends were sitting. I saw it too," Amanda whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not a glitch. It's real." The figure's outline became sharper, more defined. But it didn't look like a person. It was something else, something unsettling. Her parents exchanged worried glances. Was it a malfunction? A glitch in the system? Or was it something more terrifying? Something they couldn't explain? They stood frozen, watching the figure slowly make its way across the room. The alarms blared again, this time louder and more urgently. And just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow flickered and disappeared, as if it had never been there at all. The cameras, which had been recording the entire time, fell silent. Everything returned to normal, but the room felt different, charged, as though something had just happened, but they couldn't grasp it. The security camera had captured something that defied any logical explanation. Amanda's heart was still racing. She couldn't dismiss what she had seen, what they had all witnessed. What was that shadow? Where did it come from? And why was it there on Christmas Eve? The events of the night weighed heavily on Amanda's mind. Her parents were as shocked as she was, but they insisted that it was a simple technical glitch. There's no way a security camera could pick up something like that, her father had said, dismissing the incident. But Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The following days were filled with tension. The memory of the shadow, flickering and moving across the screen, haunted Amanda's thoughts. Was it just a malfunction? Or was there something more sinister at play? Despite her father's reassurances, Amanda couldn't help but feel that the camera had captured something real, something supernatural. After the incident, the camera footage was carefully reviewed, but to Amanda's surprise, there was no sign of any malfunction. The footage was clear and uninterrupted, showing a perfectly normal scene until the shadow appeared. Even though the camera hadn't picked up any other unusual movement, that single moment seemed to defy all logic. Amanda decided to take matters into her own hands. She spent hours researching online, looking for any similar occurrences. What she found was even more unsettling. There were stories of people reporting strange figures appearing on security footage, shadows that couldn't be explained, figures that seemed to manifest out of nowhere. Some of these stories were from people who had cameras similar to the Martins, while others were from people who had cameras monitoring their homes, businesses, or even outdoor spaces. But no one seemed to have a clear explanation. Most of the theories were vague. Some believed the shadows were caused by light interference. Others thought it might be the result of electromagnetic disturbances. But none of the explanations fit Amanda's experience. The figure she had seen on the camera wasn't a typical shadow. It had an almost tangible form, one that seemed to interact with its surroundings. It wasn't like any glitch or reflection Amanda had ever encountered. Determined to get answers, Amanda reached out to the company that manufactured the cameras. She explained the situation in detail, describing the shadow and her concerns. A few days later, she received a response from a customer service representative, but it only raised more questions. We are aware of the possibility of unusual interference with certain environmental factors. However, our products are not designed to capture or interpret supernatural phenomena. If you continue to experience unusual issues, we suggest checking for electrical interference or issues with the camera's calibration. We cannot guarantee the accuracy of any footage outside of normal usage. Amanda was frustrated. The response was dismissive, and it didn't answer any of her questions. What did the company mean by unusual interference? Was it possible that there was something they weren't telling her? As the days passed, Amanda's unease grew. She began noticing other strange occurrences around the house. Objects would be slightly out of place. Doors that were closed would sometimes be found ajar. But it wasn't until she saw the camera's feed again that things truly took a darker turn. One evening, while the family was gathered for a quiet dinner, Amanda decided to check the camera's live feed. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find. Perhaps some sort of reassurance that everything was fine. But instead, the camera feed showed a new, even more disturbing image. The shadow was back. It was even more defined this time, almost solid, and it seemed to be watching the house from the outside, its shape distorted by the camera's lens. Amanda's heart raced as she stared at the screen. The figure wasn't in the living room anymore. It was outside, standing just beyond the window. The camera captured it from an odd angle, and for a moment it almost seemed to move closer, as if it were about to enter the house. Amanda quickly ran to tell her parents, but by the time they arrived, the figure had vanished. They checked the camera feed, but the shadow was gone. Everything appeared normal again, but Amanda knew what she had seen. Her parents were beginning to believe her, but they were still reluctant to accept the truth. Maybe it's just some kind of weird reflection, her mother said, trying to comfort her. It could be a trick of the lights or the trees outside, But Amanda wasn't convinced. The figure wasn't a reflection. It wasn't the trees or any other explanation her parents could come up with. The shape was too clear, too deliberate, and there was something unnerving about its presence. In the following days, Amanda started to feel like she was being watched. The unease grew stronger with every passing hour. Every time she looked at the camera feed, she half expected to see the shadow again. But as the days passed, the figure didn't return, at least not in a way that Amanda could see. The camera remained still, as if waiting for something. But Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow wasn't done yet. Days passed, and Amanda's sense of unease only grew. The figure on the security footage wasn't just a fleeting glitch. It was becoming a haunting presence in her life. The shadow had returned, and with it came a growing sense of dread. Amanda spent every night checking the camera feed, half expecting to see the figure appear again. But each time, the screen remained still, eerily empty. Yet, the more Amanda thought about it, the more she became convinced that the shadow was connected to something larger, something sinister. She had combed through the footage repeatedly, searching for clues, but there was never an answer. The figure had simply appeared, as if out of nowhere. She couldn't explain it. Amanda's obsession with the camera grew. She began to feel as though the house itself was watching her, the walls closing in as if the strange figure was somehow embedded in the very fabric of their home. She started noticing things that she had never paid attention to before. The way the house creaked at night, the strange hum of the air conditioning, the faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Her parents were beginning to grow concerned. "Amanda, you need to stop worrying about this," her mother said one night, her voice filled with quiet frustration. "It's just a camera glitch. There's nothing there. You're letting this get to you." But Amanda couldn't let it go. The feeling of being watched, the sense that something was lurking just out of sight, was overwhelming. She couldn't stop thinking about the shadow, and the more she thought about it, the more she was sure that the figure wasn't just a random anomaly. It was something intentional. Someone or something was trying to send a message. One night, Amanda couldn't sleep. She found herself staring at the footage once again, replaying the footage over and over, hoping for some kind of explanation, some detail she might have missed. She zoomed in on the screen, trying to catch a glimpse of something that could explain the figure's appearance. Then, as if on cue, the camera feed flickered. The screen went black for a moment, and Amanda's heart raced. When the screen came back on, the shadow was there again. But this time, it wasn't moving. It was standing still, facing the camera, as if it knew she was watching. The shape seemed more defined than before, its outline clearer. The figure appeared to be standing outside, just beyond the window, staring directly into the camera. For a moment, Amanda froze, unable to move. The figure's eyes seemed to pierce through the lens, looking straight at her. A sudden, sharp knock at the front door startled Amanda out of her trance. Her heart skipped a beat as she rushed to the door, expecting to see someone standing outside. But when she opened it, there was no one there. Confused and shaken, Amanda stepped outside, looking around, but the street was empty. She looked back at the window, half expecting the shadow to be there, but it was gone. The door creaked in the wind, and Amanda closed it behind her, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. But the relief was short-lived. As she turned to head back inside, something caught her eye. The figure, now standing clearly outside, had shifted. It was no longer just standing still. It was moving. Amanda rushed to the monitor, her breath shallow, as the camera feed showed the figure approaching the house. This time, the shadow didn't look like a reflection or a glitch. It seemed solid, and it was getting closer. The closer it got to the window, the more tangible it seemed. It was as if the figure was drawn to the house, to the camera, as though it were trying to interact with the family. A wave of panic surged through Amanda as she watched the shadow get closer, its movements deliberate and slow. She backed away from the screen, trying to pull herself together. "It's just a trick of the light," she whispered to herself. "It's not real." But deep down, she knew. She couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow wasn't just a trick. It wasn't something explainable. It was something real. In a panic, Amanda ran to her parents, shaking as she told them what was happening. "It's back. It's right outside." "Please, you have to see this." Her parents followed her to the living room, but when they looked at the camera feed, they saw nothing. The screen was dark, as though nothing had been there at all. The shadow was gone just like before, but Amanda knew what she had seen. The next morning, Amanda couldn't help but feel that the house was different, as though it had changed overnight. The air felt colder, the walls felt closer. She kept looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see the shadow again, but it never appeared. It was as though it had vanished, as though it was waiting. But Amanda was no fool. She knew that it wasn't over. The figure was still there, lurking in the background, watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. And as Christmas morning dawned, Amanda realized that the shadow wasn't just a Christmas oddity. It was a warning, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Christmas morning arrived, and the Martins' house was eerily quiet. The festive spirit had faded, replaced by a thick tension that seemed to hang in the air. Amanda couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her, that something was waiting just beyond her reach. The shadow was still there, lurking in the background, and she could feel its presence everywhere. Despite the calm on the outside, something was stirring inside Amanda. She could no longer ignore the strange happenings around her. The figure outside the window, its eyes locked on the camera, was the final piece in the puzzle. She knew now that whatever it wasn't a trick or a malfunction. This was real. But why? What was the shadow trying to communicate? And why had it appeared on Christmas Eve, a night meant to bring joy and peace? Amanda decided that she couldn't keep this to herself anymore. The truth had to be revealed. But as she tried to gather her thoughts, she realized that there was no easy way to explain this to her parents. They had already dismissed her warnings, but Amanda knew that what she was experiencing wasn't something that could be ignored. Determined to find answers, she reached out to an expert, a paranormal investigator who specialized in unexplained phenomena. When she explained the situation over the phone, the investigator was skeptical but agreed to come by and take a look. That evening, the investigator arrived, bringing with him a variety of equipment designed to detect paranormal activity. He set up his tools around the house, scanning for any unusual readings. Amanda led him to the living room, where the camera feed was still active. The investigator studied the footage for a while, his brow furrowing. "This is definitely odd," he said, "but I need to get a closer look at the environment." He began to take readings with his equipment, walking around the house and measuring fluctuations in the air and electromagnetic fields. Amanda watched him work, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she believed in the supernatural, but everything that had happened so far seemed to defy explanation. The camera footage, the feeling of being watched, the shadow that had appeared and disappeared without warning. It was all too much. Then, the investigator paused in the hallway, his eyes widening as he stared at his equipment. "There's something here," he said softly, his voice filled with concern. "It's not just a glitch or a malfunction. There's an energy in this house, and it's tied to that shadow." Amanda's blood ran cold. She had known it all along. The shadow wasn't just a figment of her imagination. It was something far more dangerous, something that had taken root in her home. "Is it dangerous?" Amanda asked, her voice trembling. The investigator looked at her seriously. "I can't say for sure, but I've seen this kind of thing before. When these types of entities latch onto a place, they don't let go easily. You need to be careful." Amanda felt a wave of fear wash over her. The investigator wasn't offering any solutions, just vague warnings. What did he mean by entities? Was this thing the work of something supernatural? Or was it merely the result of a malfunctioning camera? A series of coincidences? The investigator spent the rest of the evening attempting to communicate with the entity, using a variety of methods to try and make contact. But all of his attempts failed. The figure remained elusive, slipping in and out of the camera's view, never staying in one place long enough to be fully captured. It was as if it was deliberately avoiding detection. By the time the investigator left, Amanda felt more confused than ever. The figure, the strange disturbances, the inexplicable readings, it all pointed to something beyond the ordinary. But there were no answers, no way to know for sure what was happening. The next day, Amanda decided to take matters into her own hands. She sat down in front of the camera monitor once again, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. She replayed the footage, zooming in on the shadow's movements, trying to make sense of it all. And that's when she saw it. The shadow wasn't just moving around the house. It was getting closer. The figure was now inside the house, moving through the rooms as if it were part of the walls themselves. Amanda's heart raced as she watched the footage. The figure was coming for them. Without thinking, she rushed to her parents, shaking as she told them what was happening. But as she spoke, she realized that they weren't listening. They weren't hearing her anymore. The shadow had already infiltrated their lives, and they were too afraid to confront it. It wasn't until later that night, when Amanda was alone in the living room, that the figure appeared again. This time, it wasn't outside. It was standing right in front of her, as if it had been waiting for her to finally acknowledge it. Amanda stood frozen in place, unable to move as the figure stepped closer. Its form became more defined, and for the first time, Amanda could see its face. It was a pale, expressionless mask, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly into her soul. And then, as if it had never been there at all, the figure vanished. Amanda collapsed onto the couch, gasping for breath. The room felt empty, but the fear lingered. She knew that the shadow was still there, watching her, waiting. It wasn't just a ghost. It was a harbinger of something far worse. With a sense of finality, Amanda knew that this Christmas would be remembered not for the joy it brought, but for the darkness that had come with it. And she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning.